I'm Kyle Malnati, your host of the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. At Calibrate, we exist to help people create generational wealth through real estate. My personal mission is to encourage, empower, and educate you by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. This is episode 120, and I am with my esteemed expert guest, Dr. Galena Rhoades of Wash Park Psychology. Hello, Dr. Rhoades.
Hi, Kyle. I'm happy to be joining you today.
I am so excited. Now, this is a fairly, I think in some circles, it could be a taboo conversation about psychology, about therapy. I'm fortunate in that I think in our society, in our culture, it's becoming more normal and it's becoming less stigmatized. But I think there, especially for high achievers, for people that are used to kind of seizing the day, going and taking care of business. I think that the idea of mental health or therapy almost can sometimes feel like it's a weakness. And I will say that there have been times in my life that I may have felt that way. But a few years ago, because we happened to office in the same office building, and I was having some relational tension, some things I had never experienced before as a leader, I said, I really need to really get out of my own head. I need to bounce ideas off of someone that is educated and really knows how to handle some of these things. And we've had this great professional relationship over the past couple of years where I'm able to really work through a lot of problems, and I'm able to have a sounding board, and I'm able to get some clarity from you as a psychologist. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that and have that lead into my next question, or my first question, I should say, which is, what does a therapy session look like? I mean, I've been a part of it, but I think for someone that may be listening in, that's maybe not even here in Colorado and is entertaining the idea of working with a therapist, working with a psychologist, what are some things that you could expect? What are some things that you typically suggest to people as a doctor of why they would need to even start going to therapy in the first place?
Well, I think the first visit often looks a little bit different than subsequent visits. And it might look different across different therapists or psychologists or coaches too. But for me, I really like to spend the first meeting talking about what someone's goals are, right? And also getting a sense of their history and different experiences that they've had or turning points throughout their life. But I really want to leave that first session with a game plan for how frequently it makes sense to meet and what kind of work to expect throughout our work together. And I think that therapy sessions can look pretty different depending on what someone's interests and needs are. So for some people, it's really the time in the week that they're processing or working on things. And for a lot of people that works well. Sometimes people really want a lot of direction about, not quite advice. I don't think we do advice necessarily, but direction on how to manage certain things that might be happening in their relationships, at work, in their family. And at other times, people actually do a lot of processing between meetings, right? So sometimes those sessions are almost more of a check-in on everything that someone's been thinking about, working on, changing, the homework they've been doing throughout the week. And I think it depends on what someone's looking for, what that therapy session might really look like.
Yeah, the work is a really important thing to discuss because after each session, and it's typically 45 to 50 minutes where we'll check in with each other. I always feel like that when I've got a reserved session out in the future, it's really interesting how something sort of manifests and starts to happen. And I'm like, thank goodness I had this on the calendar, because now I have something that I really need to talk about. And I never go to a session saying, I shouldn't have scheduled this. I always feel like there's more to talk about and more to work through. And that's why I just enjoyed this journey of therapy. And I really feel like it's a very positive experience. For me at least, there's not a whole lot of crying. There's no laying on the couch. I sit in a chair, sit on a couch with you face to face when we're not in this COVID-19 crisis where we can't see each other. Normally we are meeting in your office, and it's just a great discussion. I've had therapy sessions where I've brought in my wife, Courtney. I've had therapy sessions where I've brought in key members of my team. I've had therapy sessions where I haven't been there, but I know someone else needs professional help. And so for leaders out there that are listening in to this podcast, you can use therapy with a bunch of different elements that can really help you grow a good, healthy environment. So that I think is the foundation of just why I use therapy and why I really appreciate our professional relationship. Now, in this particular period of time, as everybody throughout the country is going through these stay-at-home orders, we're all learning to work from home. We're learning to work at home with kiddos, if a lot of us have kids, and some of us are working from our kitchen tables, or as my family affectionately calls it, the dad's lair down in the basement. Or, it's not really a man cave, it's more my lair, which is what you're seeing in the background here. So what are some suggestions that you might have for people that are all of a sudden displaced? They're used to coming into an office. They're used to the ritual of, getting dressed for the day, grabbing their coffee, saying goodbye to their loved ones, driving into the office. That's a process that I think gets you ready for work. And then they're at work, and then they, go home. And if you can't do that all of a sudden, what are some things that you suggest in this new experience of really being forced to work from home and not having the outlet of being able to go to an office?
I think one of the most important things that people have found over these last few weeks is having a schedule and clarifying what those expectations are for anybody else that's in your home. So that's your partner, your children, roommates, whatever that might look like, but really clarifying what those expectations are around the schedule. I think a schedule is also helpful for most people personally as well, because it gives you some sense of routine, some sense of knowing what you can predict. And given all the news and all the information, the barrage of information that we're hearing and how uncertain these times are, I think having a sense of being able to predict and control part of our lives is really important. So setting a schedule is one useful tool. I think another one, Kyle, is being sure that you're building in some time to commute and transition, right? So you're getting out of bed in the morning and then you got to be on a call in 15 minutes. That might not be enough time to really make that call as comfortable and productive as it could be, right? So building in some time for you to transition from one state to another, transition from the role of husband or wife to someone showing up at work to lead or to be a strong employee, commuting from being the dad who's trying to get his child on the technology to do distance learning to then leading again and maybe solving a very similar technology issue for an employee, but building in that kind of sense that you're transitioning from role to role, I think is also really important in these work from home circumstances.
Yeah, it's great advice, and something that you suggested to me, even just as it relates to therapy, with the process of, it was really convenient working literally in the office above where your office is, and walk downstairs, go to a session. You said, most people have the ability to at least get in their car and drive back to work, drive back home, and they have that time to really reflect on what just happened, but also to really kind of emotionally work through, not just reflect, but have that emotional work through of, okay, I'm leaving, I'm going. And I didn't have that. And you said it might make sense for you not to go march right back into work and march right back into a situation that could be, you could interact with the person we just talked about, and you might not have had the adequate time to actually think through things. So I think that idea of transitioning is really important, and especially so as you're working from home, because I might be down in dad's lair and then walk upstairs and it's family time. And that literally is a 20-second walk where it used to be a 20-minute commute. And I'm on the phone now with different people, and my kids and my family are seeing that, and they're reflecting on how I react to people on the phone. And one of the things, this is a funny thing that I can share safely with our audience, but we had, and I'm going to say in air quotes, a little intervention when when we were forced, and I will say I felt like I was acquiescing to the stay-at-home orders to shut our office down. That was a very difficult day for our staff. The next day I had a Zoom call with my whole team. I had an interview, and I had several other negotiations on deals that were really important. And I sort of acted like nothing had changed, even though I was very clearly working in my children and wife's domicile, you know, the area that they had become comfortable in, because 10 days prior was when they started having to stay at home. And they all sat around with me, and we literally had a meeting on our outside patio table where they said, Dad, we feel like, you know, one, you're kind of giving us your worst self. You're giving your clients your best. And at times we'll hear you either get ready to answer the phone and we can hear you say like, oh man, I had to talk to this person almost begrudgingly, or we'll hear you hang up the phone after being super sweet as sugar, and then you're grouchy with us. And what's going on? And then also just realize that you're sitting in the middle of what we've been doing, which is at home learning. And you're kind of expecting that we're going to revolve around you instead of you're now intersecting into our space. And that was a really humbling situation. It was something you and I talked about in detail. And you said, you are going to have to figure out what this new working situation looks like. You're going to have to create a schedule, have Courtney review it, and really make sure your family feels like you are helping them and not intervening or kind of being there, acting like nothing has changed. And so that was an important exercise that you ran me through. I think it's also worth saying that when we're in this period of time where everybody is staying at home, it does feel uncertain. But to the real estate professional, to the entrepreneur that might be listening, we're electing to be in a very uncertain business at all times. And I really feel like, I think for a lot of people, there's this false sense of stability. And so if you wouldn't mind, Galena, just talking through the idea that really there are uncertain times always. This is certainly a very dramatic example of that, but how you help people really become comfortable and learn how to become mentally aware of the fact that we're not in control and we can only control the things that we do have control over, and just what that looks like and certainly we can use me as an example, but just what that looks like kind of dealing with uncertainty and having hope amidst some things that are chaotic at times.
You know, I think that's right, that in this time, many people, many of us feel as though it's a brand new experience, that this uncertainty is such a level of chaos, and for many people that creates a lot of anxiety, right? And then behavior that is trying to kind of control, or can sometimes come out angry because we're trying to multitask, and we've got this other stressor of just not knowing when the stay-at-home orders may end, you know, when kids may be able to go back to school, when we can go back to our offices. And I think you're right, Kyle, that while it feels so different, like this is a new normal, in fact, every day that we wake up, we don't really have the ability to predict what's going to happen during the day. And for some people, we actually like that variability, or maybe even the volatility, right? And I wonder if in real estate in particular, you know, many people in real estate now have been through lots of different uncertain times and changes, right? The financial crash of 2008, for a very different reason than what we're experiencing now in the markets, is a good example. And I think sometimes that energy around variability can actually be really positive, and really positive for our work, in recognizing that there are opportunities to make changes in uncertain times, and that we are unlikely to go back to just what things were 1 month ago before we'd ever heard of coronavirus. But that's a good thing, right? There's opportunity when things change to really have a chance to be more intentional about what we want, what's most important, to set our priorities, and to lead in the ways that we really want to lead.
I love that. And it's a great opportunity for us to evolve, to become better. Our company is called Calibrate Real Estate. So is the podcast. It's an opportunity to make iterations, to realize, okay, we can find a way to be swift and nimble. And one of the things you and I speak about a lot in our sessions is resilience. And this is a great time to realize that we can be resilient. We can find a way to overcome. And at the same time, when it feels like the world might be crashing down on us, there is help. There is an opportunity to have therapy as an opportunity for sounding board, and for constructive advice that you can actually help work through what the issues are at hand. So that's what I appreciate about therapy, is it really just helps me work through the things that are already there. And I've always had coaches. I've always had spiritual leaders, people that I've sought out, but had never worked with a psychologist. And I would just say, for those that maybe have been contemplating that, mental health is a really important aspect of success. And it's a very, I mean, frankly, it's an important aspect of life. But when you're someone that's successful and you're someone that has a lot of responsibility and you're leading a group of people, I believe that mental health is really something that people oftentimes neglect until all of a sudden there's a breakdown moment. And so for those that might not ever be able to work with you or visit with you, what are some, dare I say, triggers or just some tools that we can utilize maybe in between therapy sessions that that could help us if we're feeling like we're really having what we all call a day? You know, you feel like you're just, you know, you don't have that ability to reach out to a coach or a therapist because it's not scheduled, and you feel like you've got one foot in the fire and the other in the frying pan. So what are some things that we can do to help reflect and really feel like, okay, whether it's breathing exercises or just things that we can do to really feel like, all right, it's going to be okay?
Well, one thing that most stay-at-home orders allow us to do is step outside and take some deep breaths. And even if it's rainy, cloudy, freezing cold outside, taking some deep breaths, really focusing on just getting that chance to relax your body, gain some perspective. That fresh air, I think, is really an important tool. It doesn't take a long time, but stepping out of your environment and getting that break and doing some deep meditative breathing is a really great skill to be able to employ. I think another thing that we can do is also pay attention to thinking traps that we get into, things that you might hear yourself saying over and over again, like, this is never going to work out, things are never going to change, you know, there's no hope. And recognizing that some of that is just habit. You know, the things that we tell ourselves, about our work, about our family, that doesn't really do us any good to think those negative thoughts. And once we can recognize that we're having them and that they're sort of these thinking traps that keep us stuck in those kind of negative feelings, emotions, we can recognize them, you can file them away and decide, all right, I'm going to open that drawer again when I need to actually examine these thoughts and really think through if there's a change I need to make. But for now, the process is just recognizing, all right, I think these things over and over again. It's a habit. I've thought them. I can let them go. I don't need to think those thinking traps again today, or at least for the next half hour.
Well, and the thing that I often think about is that if you've got a place, and some people will call it a parking lot, you know, a notepad or whatever, you can say, I had this thought, I had this feeling. If you have the ability to write it down, and if you're working with a therapist that you've got a good professional relationship with, you can then share that in a space, oftentimes not in the heat of the moment, and really work through that and create a solution, or at least some sort of exercise that can help you work through that the next time. So that's another just benefit of actually having an active therapy relationship. I'd like to go into a few questions that I ask all of our guests. And some of these are going to be more business oriented. Some of them are going to be more leadership, but I think it's certainly apropos to speak with as it relates to therapy and mental health. So I believe that most successful people are really kind of standing on a mountain of failure. That's a quote that I got from one of my favorite business authors, a guy named Dave Ramsey, where it's like, you know, we tend to fail forward, which is a John Maxwell book. And I think a lot of times as a young person, and then as you've had some experience, you realize that there's going to be a certain element of trial and error, and you've got to iterate, you've got to calibrate. So how do you help people, maybe like myself, that are in a spot where things are blowing up around them and they feel like nothing is going right, and they're in that thinking trap of saying, oh, this reminds me of the situation where I had this huge failure, and how they might work through it? Because I think that failure really has a lot of lessons built into things that aren't working out for us.
You know, I think one of the things that's important to be able to do and this might sound backwards, is to not just cheerlead for someone in that situation, right? So let's say you're talking to your partner who's facing a lot of adversity at work right now, feeling like things are not working, failing. One of the ways that we sometimes support people is to be able to say, like, all right, it's going to be better. You got to just have hope, be optimistic. Everything's going to turn out all right. And there are some times when that works well, but I think oftentimes what we really need is to be able to find that hope within ourselves and to be able to be optimistic because we really believe it, not just because someone else is telling us that. And I think one of the important ways to do that is to really get the chance to, what we would call in psychology, debrief about any failure or something that didn't work out the way that you wanted it to. You got to have that chance to think through, why did that happen? Are there things that I could change that might make this more successful going forward? What did I learn about myself when I really take that opportunity to reflect, to know that it could be different next time? I think what's challenging about the current circumstances and uncertainty is that a lot of that is going to be things that we don't have a lot of control or even influence over. And that might also be an important reminder, is just to recognize that sometimes things happen and they just happen. And sometimes things happen and we can learn from them and know ways that we can be stronger and do better going forward.
I believe that times of change really expose some of the things that we may have been thinking about or knew that we weren't. I'll use this in an example of, someone takes on too much debt, and all of a sudden you have this correction in a market, and all of a sudden you're feeling like, okay, I'm no longer in a position that I feel comfortable with. And maybe the lesson there is, I need to go through some personal finance classes, or I need to have some tools that don't make me feel so overwhelmed or stretched thin or extended. And I think that in many ways, if you can look at times like this as a good opportunity to make sure that you're revisiting all of the things that you were doing on a regular basis, and are they things that need to happen anymore? One of the things we were chatting about before this interview is that these stay-at-home orders are forcing me not to be in the office, and I'm not sure I should be in the office at all times, or sort of have a random schedule with being in the office, as opposed to maybe having more like office hours where there's certain days that people know they can expect me there, and then there's other days where they're like, regardless of whether Kyle has work to do or not, he's just not going to be here, sort of like a professor. So I think it's a good opportunity to just reevaluate those things. Another question that I ask all of our guests is this idea of Dear Younger Me. It's one of the last questions I ask every single guest. It comes from a song that I really enjoy, where it's this idea you're writing a letter to yourself, you're doing that work, and you're writing it having gone through some experience to your younger self. And you might be able to impart that to someone that you're mentoring, but I've dubbed this question as the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. So Galena, what is that advice that maybe you wish you knew when you were younger, that now that you've gone through some experience, now that you've become a doctor and you've gone through a lot of education in this area, what's some of the advice that maybe you'd impart to your younger self?
The clearest piece of advice that I've received and now often give is decide, don't slide. Don't slide through circumstances that might get you stuck in something that isn't a good fit for you, work, relationships, all kinds of experiences, without making an intentional decision about what's right for you. So I really think it's important to focus on, at this time especially, being intentional. And as we come out of this and have the opportunity to make different choices about what work looks like, what our family life looks like, now we have all this new information, like you were saying about yourself, Kyle, to make new decisions, right? That we don't just have to slide back into old habits and patterns. We can really make decisions about what's right for us, for our families, for our work moving forward.
I love that. Decide, don't slide. And that's actually the first time I've heard that. So that'll be something we use in future sessions together. Okay, last question before we talk about Motherwise, which is something I really want to talk to you about. So the answer to that question And I've shared this with you. I have a good personal friend that was my career coach, Chris Oakley, that passed away this past December. He was a guest on this podcast. And when I asked the Dear Younger Me question, his answer was that he was in a mentoring group in his 20s with some older guys. It was a Christian mentoring group, and they were reading the book called Principle of the Path by Andy Stanley. And there's an exercise in that book that requires you to write your own obituary, requires you to sort of self-eulogize, if you will. And it centers around the topic of legacy. And I think of the commercial from the 90s of Tombstone Pizza Company, you know, what do you want on your tombstone type of thing. And as you think about your own legacy, as you think about yourself in a professional and medical standpoint, but then also as a spouse and as a mother, what would you personally want your legacy to be as, you know, maybe as you leave this world?
It's really important to me that my legacy be one that empowers people, other people, to make the decisions that are right for them. And and this relates to some of the work that you alluded to that I do at Motherwise. My career focus is really on empowering people with the information, the tools, and the skills that they need to do what's right for them and right for their families.
I love that. And let's talk about Motherwise. How did you become involved in that? What is Motherwise, and what are some of the neat things that you're doing in that organization?
Motherwise grew out of work that I'd done as a research professor at the University of Denver, lots of research on romantic relationships, couples, and how relationships develop and how people make decisions in relationships. So Motherwise is a program for women during pregnancy and postpartum where we provide workshops about what healthy relationships look like, what they don't, communication skills that she can use with her family, at work, across all different kinds of relationships. And we address challenges in relationships today, like co-partnering, co-parenting with someone, introducing a partner to your children, challenges that many people face today where there really aren't any guidebooks. So our focus there is on giving her the skills, the tools, and community resources that she needs to make the decisions that are right for her and right for her family. And we enroll about 400 women a year into the program and really want to provide her with all of the support that she needs to make bringing up her new baby a success.
That's amazing. And what are some of the things, without naming any names, but just some of the pinch me moments where you're like, wow, that was a mountaintop experience that I have with someone in Motherwise where I can really empower them with some tools that they can work with. And just, I'm imagining that that work is very rewarding to you.
It is really rewarding. And, you know, I think day after day, we see that with basic skills that none of us have often really learned, we can accomplish so much for ourselves and for our children with just really being able to engage with other people well, manage conflict well, and feel empowered that we know what's right when we really pay attention to who we want to be and how we want to parent and have the support in the community to do that, that we can really change lives and accomplish so much.
That's amazing. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to say, how does someone check out Motherwise? Certainly if they're in Colorado, but just in general, if they're interested in supporting in some way, how do they find Motherwise online?
Well, this year I started a nonprofit to be able to support the program and the other services that we offered, and it's called Thriving Families. And our website is thrivingfamiliescolorado.org.
Awesome. Thrivingfamiliescolorado.org. That's great. Thank you, Galena. So without further ado, this is the end of our show here. And I think that it's really important to say that if you're struggling through something, there's help out there. There's a lot of resources, but I would share that if you've got the ability to see a therapist, create a mental health positive relationship with someone that can really walk you through life, I think it's a wonderful thing, and something that I have certainly gotten through maybe some of that initial stigma, and as someone that's an achiever, certainly as someone that's a guy, as a male, you know, that's sometimes something that we struggle with. And I just very much appreciate all the things that you've helped me work through, Galena. And I just really appreciate the ability to be interviewing you. This is something we've talked about for several years now, and just exciting to bring you onto the podcast. I know it's going to bless someone today, and I'm just very appreciative of your advice.
Thank you, Kyle. It's
You're
been
welcome.
a privilege to get to be part of your journey.
Thank you. And for our podcast producer, Kayla Davis, and for our esteemed guest, Galena Rhoades, Dr. Galena Rhoades, my name is Kyle Malnati, and as I love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.